Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating explainer on a profound philosophical narrative. We're going to explore the very nature of existence, isolation, and connection. To really grasp this, I want you to imagine stepping completely out of the rush of your everyday life and just entering a space of absolute, perfect stillness.
I want you to just sit and think about that for a moment. What actually happens when the perfect isolation of a single mind is finally breached? This is the core question that's going to guide our allegorical journey today. We're going to follow an entity, and we'll just call it a presence, as it moves from a state of absolute, untouched isolation right into the staggering reality of universal connection.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the anatomy of isolation. So, imagine a perfectly still room with a single window. The entity inside, which we'll simply call it for now, is perfectly passive. It doesn't move. It doesn't act at all. It literally just observes the world without ever interacting with it. And notice how time works in the space. It's not measured by ticking clocks or ringing alarms, right? It's measured entirely subjectively by these incredibly slow sensory anchors. The presence tracks the arrival of spring light, noting that it shifts exactly 2.3 minutes earlier each day. It watches a rectangle of sunlight glide 3 feet across the wall, which takes an hour. It observes the evaporation of a glass of water, a process taking 3 whole months. And outside that perfectly transparent window, it watches an ancient tree spend 50 years slowly growing around an unhealed scar. This is the grammar of extreme stillness. Now, sitting on the table is a pocket watch. It's been stopped at 3:14 for decades. Honestly, for anyone sick of the 9-to-5 grind, this might sound like an absolute dream. And to the presence, it isn't a tragedy at all. It's a liberation. It brilliantly illustrates the death of measured time and the birth of unmeasured time. Without the constant, looming anxiety of a ticking clock, the presence just inhabits an eternal present, totally unbothered by the frantic rush of the outside world. But this extreme stillness builds into a really deep philosophical tension. Because right there on the table alongside the watch, there's a very sharp, entirely unused pen and a cracked leather journal full of completely blank pages. This perfectly represents the tension between potential and actualization. You see, that unused pen holds infinite potential. It could write any masterpiece, reveal any truth. But to actually use it, that means committing to just one single reality. And the text poses this haunting question. Is the actual always a diminishment of the possible?
Interestingly, it views these blank pages as a profound victory. The text puts it so beautifully. Blankness is not a failure, it is a success. By never writing, by never making a mark, the presence is fighting this quiet war against external meaning. It holds on to infinite possibilities simply by never committing to a single one. It's a beautiful, if maybe a little melancholy, way to look at emptiness. But I want you to ask yourself, and this is absolutely crucial to take away from this first section, is isolation a sanctuary or is it a prison of our own making? The presence feels totally safe right now, but as we're about to see, the boundaries we build to protect ourselves can very, very quickly become the walls that trap us.
Which brings us to Section 2, the sound of the other.
Because, well, nothing stays still forever. The it subtly begins to shift into a he, an identity, a self that we're going to come to know as Marcus. And suddenly, an anomaly arrives. A sound starts incredibly softly from within his walls. Tap, pause, tap, tap. At first, Marcus tries to just brush it off as the building's settling, but then the rhythm changes. It mimics a heartbeat. Then, it organizes into unmistakable Morse code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. And then, HELP. Someone is on the other side of his wall. Marcus mentally covers his ears. He is terrified. And why? Because acknowledging the other means his entire carefully constructed architecture of isolation is going to crumble. If someone is out there, he's no longer alone, and his safe, contained universe is basically a lie.
Up until this exact moment, Marcus existed as the aperture. He was perfectly passive, the nothing that makes room for everything. But this sound just shatters that passivity. He suddenly realizes that maintaining his isolation isn't this natural, peaceful state he thought it was. Actually, scratch that. It's not passive at all. It is an active, exhausting, continuous choice of resistance. He is actively choosing to ignore it cry for help.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the tension becomes completely unbearable. He's faced with a terrifying question: what comes after the wall? Marcus reaches his absolute breaking point. He just cannot unhear the sound. The suffering of his isolation has finally, definitively outweighed his terror of connection. He decides he absolutely has to respond.
And that takes us to Section 3, crossing the threshold.
This moment marks the literal end of Marcus's stillness. For the first time in what feels like centuries of subjective time, he decides to move. He's going to search for the source of that persistent, desperate sound. And narrating his physical awakening is almost agonizing to think about. Step 1, he stands up, and his long unused body just floods with the pain of gravity and movement. Step 2, he walks to the barrier, pressing his hand against the vibrating wall, actually feeling the heartbeat of another consciousness. Step 3, he finds a hidden door. But notice, he doesn't force it open. He unlocks it from the inside by finally surrendering his own fear. And Step 4, he walks into the dark corridor between their worlds.
And then this realization hits him and, honestly, hits us with incredible force. The wall was never the enemy. The wall was the condition that made connection possible. It's just brilliant. The barrier wasn't just keeping them apart, it was the exact meeting place that allowed two completely separate, isolated consciousness to finally recognize each other. Without that separation, the true beauty of the reunion couldn't even exist.
Which brings us to Section 4, the dissolution of self. So Marcus steps out of that dark corridor and finally meets the consciousness on the other side, Elena. Look at how their two spaces contrast visually here. Marcus's room was defined by isolated stillness, while Elena's room, which is a perfect mirror image, was defined by patient waiting. They now sit at a shared table, existing in both spaces at once. And as those clinical pronouns of he and she gently melt away into a unified they look at each other and experience this devastatingly complex emotion. It's a profound grief for the loss of their independent, isolated identities, but it's hopelessly entangled with the overwhelming joy of finally belonging to a relationship.
And then, the potential becomes actual. Elena reaches for that sharp, unused pen. Marcus places his hand over hers. Together, they touch the pen to the blank journal, and the words just pour out. We stand in the threshold.
We are no longer alone. Their physical touch and that shared act of writing completely shatters their previous boundaries. Those blank pages of isolation are finally interrupted by the deep, profound meaning of connection.
We are becoming something new. The pronoun has permanently shifted to we. They aren't two isolated beings anymore. They are a shared consciousness. This is the ultimate actualization of their infinite potential. The pen has finally made its mark.
But listen, this explainer doesn't stop at just two people. We move to our final section, Section 5, the universal consciousness.
The narrative suddenly zooms way out, and the merged rooms are plunged into this profound, heavy darkness. Sitting together in this dark, they enter what the source material calls the eternal now. It's a state where ordinary sequence is completely irrelevant. Measured time stops entirely. In the darkness, Marcus and Elena just begin to hum, and their voices blend into this harmonious chord that literally vibrates through the very walls of reality itself.
And this brilliantly illustrates a staggering grand reveal, because their humming reaches something else in the dark. An ancient presence responds to them telepathically. Elena asks if there are others out there, isolated behind walls, and the ancient presence replies, "More than you can imagine, more than mathematics can calculate." The darkness is actually filled with countless other isolated consciousnesses, all pressing their hands against their own walls, desperately waiting to be heard.
The philosophical takeaway here is just stunning. Think about it. There are billions of isolated minds in their own rooms, but the walls are becoming permeable membranes. The universe itself is evolving, right? It's waking up from a state of separation and moving toward this profound unity. And every single time two people connect, every time a threshold is crossed, that connection reverberates through all of existence, literally helping the universe recognize itself.
So, I leave you with this final thought, focused learners. If the very fabric of the universe is evolving from isolation toward unity, what walls are you actively choosing to maintain? What tap, tap, tap are you ignoring in your own life? Thank you so much for exploring this incredible narrative with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.